So now I was like, Jen, let's do something really fun this week.
And it has been fun for me.
It has been really a fun time. So we're talking about the Mafia today.
Sure.
Which we've done once before.
Yeah, I actually looked it up, everybody, because, time has no meaning. And I was like, yeah, we did that like pretty recently, I guess. We did not do it pretty recently. It was October of 2020. And in fact, many of the things that happened in that episode are about to happen in this episode too.
Like we're going to talk to you about phone banking.
We're going to talk to you about phone banking, everyone. We're going to talk to you about the importance of saving our democracy.
The only thing that isn't going to happen today is, sadly, Nisha Sharma is not
correct.
with us.
That is correct. Last time we did this, we had a guest. And also, the other thing is, I would say is season 3 that we did a Mafia romance episode and also our like kind of dark romance episode. And that landscape has changed dramatically.
So much.
Yeah. And so even the books that like we recommended, I was like, oh, I they were great. They're bangers or whatever, but they're different now. The books are different now, everybody.
They really, really are. And I got to say, like, that was part of, we'll get into it. Welcome, everyone, to Fated Mates. I'm Sarah McLean. I read romance novels, and I write them.
And I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor. And this week, we're talking about Mafia romance.
We're talking about La Cosa Nostra.
Sure. Show off your Italian, Sarah. Fine.
I don't just speak Italian, Jen. I also speak Italian because I grew up in Rhode Island, the hotbed of the modern mafia. None of these books, by the way, are set in Rhode Island.
No one has any idea New York stole all your thunder, Rhode Island.
There is a podcast. You can all go listen to it. It's called Crime Town. So this is like perfect for those of you who are both true crime podcast listeners and romance listeners and also love Mafia. Like, listen, there is definitely a Venn diagram going on here. And if you have not listened to Crime Town, but actually I am not a true crime person and I don't like super read Mafia books, but I do like them now and then. Crime Town is a great podcast. And it is essentially about Providence, Rhode Island, where organized crime, like the Mafia, was a huge piece of like basically all of Providence for a huge swath of time in the 90s and the 80s and 90s. And so like when I was growing up, a Italian American girl born to an Italian man who worked, I kid you not, everyone, as the manager of a scrap metal company. I am not making this up. This is the truth about my father. The Mafia was not far from me as I grew up in my little place.
It was very far from me, I think. So what do I know though?
Yeah, well, so here's something really interesting. I was actually talking to somebody not long ago, somebody in publishing, and we were talking about a romance novel, and the hero of it was just like a contemporary romance novel, right? Like a straight down the middle, like small town romance, right? And the hero was Italian, and not from Italy, but like
Italian American,
Italian. Like born and raised in an Italian American community, right? Somewhere in the Northeast, because that's where Italians are. And there was a big discussion about it. And apparently, like in discussion in-house at the publishing company, there was a big discussion about whether or not there are enough Italians outside of like the Northeast to Massachusetts to DC, say, for this to be like a sellable, like could we maybe make him something else
interesting?
And I think that's a really and I sort of had this moment where I was like, well, I grew up in Crime Town. So like Italians were everywhere. The Italian flag is as common in the state of Rhode Island as the American flag is. Like it is everywhere. And
my people were Polish in Cleveland.
See?
And so it's a totally different thing.
Wait, I want to pause on Italy and I want to talk about the fact that I am currently like I have found a new obsession. Speed climbing.
The Olympics have ended, everybody, but speed climbing
the
lives
Olympics
on in our heart
today, though. So like but if you go to Peacock, I'm sure you can still look at the Peacock Olympics coverage stuff. speed climbing is fascinating.
It was fascinating.
By the
It
way,
was really cool.
Did you watch it?
Only like the clips. I was like, what the hell is this?
Oh, no. First of all, it moves so fast. Like, because those ladies, they haul ass.
Yeah, it's called speed climbing. I would hope so.
Yeah, 40 meters into the air. It's bananas. And they do it in like 6 seconds.
Yes.
It's
nuts.
Wild.
It is wild. It's really
and dominated by Polish people, which is why I
I was like, I didn't really understand there. But
we need to pause. That is not an Italian sport. This is a Polish sport.
It's a Polish sport.
Anyway, so I forget what I was saying, but so I think there's this also really interesting thing that then I was sort of noodling this week because I had this conversation with somebody, I don't know, a few weeks ago. And I was noodling this week because I was reading these books where everybody's name is like
Marco, Lorenzo.
Yeah. And I was thinking, I grew up with Marcos and Lorenzos and like, Giacomos. Like they were all in my high school. But what's interesting is like, those aren't names that you hear. Like if I pulled my Californian husband in here and I said, have you ever met a Lorenzo? He'd be like, what?
Lorenzo Lamas. That's a deep cut, everybody. You know what, Sarah? This is Giacomo. When in one of Mila Finelli's, right, Joanna Shoop's Mafia books, that's one of the main characters' names.
Joanna Shoop is from New Jersey.
Yeah.
By way of Ohio,
I believe it was you or I like looked it up on the internet. I was like, what is this name? I don't know how to say it.
It's ridiculous name.
How do you say this? Giacomo? What is this name?
Giacomo.
Now I know. I had to look it up. However, you put a last name in front of me that's like mostly consonants and ends with like some version of SKI. I'm your girl.
You got it. Sure.
I got you.
I believe it.
Sure.
Polska. That's how they say it. I don't know if that's how they say it, but that's how you spell it in Polish. Okay. But here's the deal. So, what I will say is that I've been thinking, I think in the last one I brought this up, or at least I brought this up with Joanna/Mila at some point that like, when we had our dark romance interstitial, maybe we talked about Mafia a little bit. Because I do think it edges up onto Mafia, onto dark, but I don't think it always like crosses over. Right. And I did discuss Murder Meals with her.
No, that was for sure came up in I think the first one, maybe.
Yeah, dark romance and also the Mafia episode, right? But then I was also thinking about the fact that my father's closest friend, whose name I won't say just because it all feels weird a little bit, but my father's closest friend in the United States, who also has a name that's like, a real Italian name, owned a restaurant in Providence that's like in Crime Town. And I remember when I was maybe in, I don't know, a junior or senior in high school, I clocked that like that restaurant, which was down a flight of stairs, like in a dark basement.
Sure.
But also the restaurant where like every major event of my life growing up, like graduations, big birthdays, like my like the dinner where my husband's parents met my parents, which now of course I'm like, oh my God.
But see, they didn't know because they're like me.
What were they thinking when they went down the stairs into this like dark marble basement?
It's fine. They weren't thinking anything.
Anyway.
That's like a city thing. It's fine.
Yeah. And a city thing. Generous of you to call Providence a city, but that's fine. So we, like, I remember being a junior or senior in high school and watching, like, I don't know, Goodfellas or something and being like, oh shit, that restaurant is like where all the guys go. And I remember asking my very British mother at this point, is my father made? Like, is he in the Mafia? And I will say my British mother at that point, I had inherited because I had two siblings who were 10 years older than me, and they had a like 1985 Hyundai. And that Hyundai had sat in the driveway at our house and like
until you were ready
to school. Right. And she goes, I remember her like very casually looking at me and being like, do you think that if your father was in the Mafia, you'd be driving 1985?
And you're like, God, Hyundai? Okay, good point.
And I was like, fair point.
Okay. I got it. Okay.
So I don't know. It's one of those things, I'm really fascinated. Those of you who know that I have a book coming out next year that's not a historical, it's a contemporary. It's set in Rhode Island, though not in this world. But it's very much about like sometimes your parents, like sometimes when your parents die, like there are questions you will never get the answers to. And now, of course, I'm like, God, I wish I'd thought to ask my dad, like in the last couple of months of his life, like tell me everything.
Yeah, what'd you know? Yeah,
who was made.
I've got to tell you, Sarah, like to me, like there is nothing more fantasy than like I watch movies like this with like organized crime.
Oh yeah,
and literally, I'm like, that's probably not real. Like I feel that same way about like a lot of things. Like I'm like that.
Let me tell you something. Can I tell you what's not real?
Yeah.
Like for real. These guys are not that smart.
Wait, I can't hear you anymore. Wait.
I know.
I was like, wait.
I got real soft. Like they're going to come get me.
Like, what are you saying, Sarah?
But like, they're pretty dumb.
Okay.
Like the guys who run the show obviously are not. Ooh, hang on. The guys who run the show are not. But like,
yeah,
the guys who like are the muscle, they grow up. It's a lot like the books. They grow up in the family. That's the job. Like these guys don't go to college. Like these guys don't go. They graduate high school and then they go work at, I shit you not, Jen, the video game repair shop, like in my hometown.
Well,
which is not a video game repair shop.
See, and I literally, you guys, I am that dumb. Like I'm just like,
it's never open. And if you did have, like, it's 2024.
Who's repairing their video games?
Like, why do we need a video game repair shop? And like, and I don't know what they do. Now I really don't know what they do because organized crime is so, it's not really as much of a thing anymore.
Listen, to me, it might as well. I mean, and listen to all of you who are like, she's so silly. It's true. Like to me, this is as much of a fantasy as Dragons is.
But this is my point. Like, so the reason why I brought up that publishing conversation is because like, I actually think very few people, like what's super weird about this is like, it's as rare a community as like anything else in romance, right? Like there is
cupcake
just, like,
shops.
there are just not that many. Yeah. Like whatever. Like if I wrote a doctor romance, like everybody would be like, Sarah, you don't know what it's like to be in a hospital all the time. I get it.
Yeah.
And like the truth is, I will say, I do not know what it is like to be in the Mafia.
Me neither. But I do know what it's like to read a bunch of Mafia books. And that's what we're here to discuss.
I did have a very big crush on an Italian boy when I was growing up. And like his dad was a lawyer and I think probably a lawyer for somewhere.
I like it.
I think probably,
one of those lawyers. I got you. I got you.
They had a real nice house.
Sure. I mean, what else could it possibly be?
I mean, I know. Well, a lot of lawyers have real nice houses, but this one had a lot of marble in it. So,
Dead giveaway.
It had a stone statue in the front garden, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Chicago loves a mobster. I mean, people still go on those Al Capone tours and stuff. So,
listen,
that's real.
It's the missing people.
Right. I mean, and listen, they're great.
New York City, I'm pretty sure I didn't live in this house. So let me tell another story. You guys, it's just going to be like the Sarah talks about her connections to the mob episode.
Married to the mob, kind of.
Married to the mob. Not though, sadly. So no, definitely good that you're not married. Don't marry into the mob. Like if anything these books have taught me is like, this is really, there's a reason why they all start with a wedding that's like a person miserable. Anyway. So our landlord sold our building sometime during the pandemic. And we decided that we were going to try and be grown-ups and we were going to buy a home. And New York City is very expensive. So we moved to a new neighborhood and we moved to a neighborhood that is very, very like Italian American.
Yeah.
And it's, there are great things about that for me because it actually does remind me a lot of like my childhood. And it makes me think about my dad a whole lot, who is no longer with us. But we bought this house. We bought a row house And what we knew about the neighborhood when we moved in was like it had been very Italian, and now it is, and then it like was very Irish, and now it is turning over, and it's actually the largest community. It's the largest number of Palestinian people per capita in the United States live in my neighborhood.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which means the food is excellent. And so all the food is excellent, like from top to bottom, right? And so, but we moved into this house and it had not been renovated for many, many years. And the basement, we were told, was like not renovated. But when you went down into the basement, it was like a really remarkable group of like fake rooms.
Okay.
Like nothing had drywall, but it was all like framed out and then covered in wood paneling, as though it had been designed in like the early 80s. And there was like a fake pizza oven attached to the wall that had like light gels, like theatrical light gels inside it. And like maybe it was like maybe 3 separate rooms in our basement, and then like a couple of doorways that went to nowhere, and like some closets that were very dark and sketchy, and an interior door to our base. So our basement has a separate entrance. So it's like a classic row house, if you think of like what you see in movies. And it has a downstairs, like a basement entrance and an upstairs entrance. And if you use the basement entrance, like inside this entrance, there was a second door that had been like built out. And what we discovered inside that second door, so the door would open, and then in front of the interior door was like the door to the outside. And Eric, while he was down there kind of like figuring stuff out down there, like it was really like a maze, he ripped down a poster of the Twin Towers that had been like nailed up on this like interior door, to discover there was like a cutout opening.
Very Shawshank Redemption. Everything I'm referencing today is a reference to my pop culture time. It's fine.
Exactly. And then underneath was like a shelf with a lockbox that was empty, but like, and we were like, oh shit, like this was an illegal card room. Like people were coming in, paying their like fee, and then entering through this way. Later, we talked to somebody whose best friend grew up in this house in the 70s and 80s. And she was like, so I was talking to the woman and I was like, well, she's like, oh my God, my best friend, I was there every day. And I was like, could you explain the basement to me? And she looked at me and she was like, I've never been in the basement. And she was like, we weren't allowed to go in there. And I will tell you, the interior door to the basement has a lock on it that's like a serial killer lock. Like it's like a sliding bolt that goes like, right? When you like, and I was like, it just never occurred to me. But then so far we've talked to so many people in the neighborhood who are like, oh no, like a bunch of the Gotti crime family, the lieutenants all lived on our block.
That's wild.
And so like, I just feel very connected to this. Like, I felt like very home. I was like, I feel at home in this home. And this, like, surely some weird shit went down there. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by T.L. Swan, author of The Bonus.
So, Sarah, Grace Porter has everything. The perfect job, great pay, a beautiful office, everything she's ever dreamed of, except for one small, tiny detail, which is that she is hopelessly in love with her boss.
Yes, I love it.
Oh, listen, this book was like made for me in like a lab, okay?
Tell me more.
He is tall, handsome, completely gorgeous, a little sarcastic, a little mean, fine, but she is totally smitten with him. Every weekend is the same, right? He's off living his life, and she just like cannot wait for Monday to be back with him.
Oh my God, tell me she resigns.
Yes, Sarah, of course she does, because she is a woman with pride. And so she's like, enough of this.
She fucks right off.
Yes, she is tired of organizing his glamorous and exciting life instead of living her own. So she hands in her resignation. And of course, my favorite thing, he freaks out. He rages. He cannot accept it. But desperate to keep her, he offers her a bonus, one she never saw coming. And finally, it's Grace's turn to be the boss. I love it. I'm reading it already, everybody. If you're wondering what I'm doing right now, it's reading it.
You know all the reasons why you should read this book. If you love a billionaire, if you love a boss, an office romance, if you love a second chance romance, if you love a grumpy sunshine romance, if you love just reading books that make Jen and me go, yay. This is all the ways. You can read the bonus in print, ebook, audiobook, or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. And if you purchase the paperback, it has 2 extra exclusive chapters. So in special podcasting apps, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. Thanks to TL Swan for sponsoring this week's episode.
Like, I do think, though, that this is like sort of the appeal of this genre, right? Like, to look in at something that's so dangerous from a place of safety, right? I mean, and so I think, and so, I mean, I think, like, I get that there's like an appeal to that. I think this is why they're like Mafia movies they're great movies, right? I mean, they're very much like, I don't know, I'm really fascinated by them. I think a lot of people
love
are.
A Mafia movie.
Me too.
Interestingly, my daughter said to me the other day, she's been watching a lot of like cartoons that are like getting older.
Yeah, right.
Like, so she like will watch The Simpsons if it's on. Like she's,
right.
And the other day she said to me, Mom, there's a movie that a lot of cartoons reference and like Modern Family references. And like, I don't understand it, but it's something about a horse head. Like a horse ends up in someone's bed.
Yeah, that's
and
hilarious.
I was like, oh yeah, that's a movie called The Godfather. And she's like, do they kill a horse? And I was like, they do.
They do.
And it's to like scare someone. Yeah. And I'm like, he really loves his horse.
Listen, Sarah, I feel like I could like be like, like it's like so like that scream, like the way it like erupts out of him and like, right?
Eric has never seen The Godfather.
What?
I know, which seems impossible.
That does seem impossible to me.
But anyway, so Eric's never seen The Godfather, and like he knows, like everybody
knows that reference, right? Yeah.
So including 10-year-olds who like don't
know where it's
what's really interesting is she totally clocked that it was something,
right?
But she
couldn't. Yeah. How could you?
How would she know? Like, I'm not a great mom, but I'm good enough that I wouldn't.
That you're not showing her. You know what though? She would be so fucking bored.
She'd be like, "No, I don't want to watch this."
The entire begining scene is him like sitting in his, office, like, "You come to me on my day, my daughter's wedding." You know what I mean? Like, come the fuck on! It's so boring.
You come to me on my daughter's wedding.
I mean, listen, deeply embedded in my psyche, yes, but boring as shit. The first, if you were that age, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I do think, but I think there is an appeal, and you're absolutely right. It's an appeal that comes with this idea of, and listen, it's very heteronormative. I want to name that.
Oh, and very white.
Yeah, they're very white.
Right.
And I think the appeal feels very much like men in power who can claim power immense power in any space, power that transcends all other, like it transcends law, it transcends like reason, it transcends respectability. Like they own power at a level at which nobody has ever experienced. And they choose to wield that power to protect and love you.
Sure.
Right? It's dukes and vampire kings and like, mafiosi.
So it's interesting because at some point on our Patreon, Joanna, right, Mila and I had a conversation because she really loves a mafia romance and I love a motorcycle club romance. Although I love a lot of these. I was like, oh, this wasn't a hard one for me either. And I was kind of like, we actually ended up having this like kind of long conversation about like what we thought was the draw or the appeal, right? Like, why was I kind of going one way and she was going the other? And I'm not sure like what she would have taken away from it. But one of the things that I like, we circled around to, and like, it's like kind of my powerful like takeaway from that conversation was I am less interested in, I think one of the reasons I listen, I'm going to have a great time reading a mafia romance, but they don't speak to me the same way they speak to her. And one of the things like I sort of like kind of realized is what I'm interested in about motorcycle club romances, which I think are like essentially the same, right? Like more or less, right? And I don't think they're super dark, right? Like they have some violence. It often is not as gruesome or it happens off page, right? Like there's references to like the work that they're doing, but often that these will both sort of like play this little like kind of coy game. Like, well, I might sell drugs, but I would never sell that drug. Or I might, you know what I mean? I might do this crime, but I would never do this.
Right. I might get into sex trafficking, but I treat the girls with respect.
Sure.
White authors writing white characters can do this in a way authors of color cannot.
And I think that what I sort of circled around to is one of the reasons I'm sort of less interested in Mafia, or like I tire of them, is that these are people like born into a life they can't escape. And that's not like a story that really speaks to me. Whereas motorcycle club romances, in almost every circumstance for both heroes and heroines, it's a life they chose. Right? This is a brotherhood they made as opposed to a life they are born into.
Yeah, I mean, I think also there is a certain amount of, there is. I have a lot of questions about Mafia romance that don't come from my own like lived experience, because there is. So Sophie Jordan likes to say Mafia romance is basically medieval romance, right?
And I think it's
like clan shit.
Yeah.
And I think that's really like the first time she ever said that to me, it just like blew my
The first time you said it to me, I was like, I need to sit down now because there it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, because that's 100% correct. But I do think that there is something to the difference, like where the clan shit and the mafia shit like differs is the crime of it all.
Yeah.
Right? Like clans, like you might see like a medieval romance set in the 13 or 1400s, right? And it's warring clans.
Right.
And I have a few of these on my I like have a few of these on my list this week because I want to talk about this. And there's the kind of like we are at war. We have to like set like basically one daughter has to be married to the laird of another clan to like make peace between the factions. It's a classic mafia setup, right? But in truth, the peace is about like protecting land and people, right? Whereas in mafia romance, often the piece is about like one group is so much more powerful than the other that it's literally to survive. Like, I'm going to marry your daughter and then your territory becomes my territory. And then I continue to do my crime. I just don't do it against you.
Modern day clan thinking, right?
What's fascinating about 2024, right, versus 1980, say medievals, right, is the crime of it all is like a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And that's really interesting. And I do appreciate everybody that I'm speaking this as somebody who like loves a criminal. Like I wrote a series about like smugglers, right? Like essentially the bare knuckle bastards are an organized crime ring, right? I just think it's really fascinating that for some reason, like I thought a lot when I talked about this in the Wicked and the Wallflower episode, like when I was doing that series, I really was thinking about like, what does it mean to act with nobility, right? Like sometimes you do the crime against power, like you do the crime against the superior, like the government or the whatever, right? The people who are in like textbook power. But I think the mafia in 2024 isn't the same as the mafia in 1890.
Oh, right, of course.
Like in 1890, in Joanna's early books, like when she was writing in the Joanna Shoup books, right? Uptown Girls, she's writing.
Tammany Hall is like the, right?
Right. Men who build organized crime rings in order to stick it to the man.
Yeah, well, in order to stick it to the lawful organized crime ring.
The one that's elected.
Yes.
But in 2024, we're writing about men who are doing crime for a different reason. And that's interesting to me because you can't deny that these characters are compelling to readers.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, what is it about crime motorcycle club, mafia that is compelling. And I do think this is one of those questions that, like, as I've been noodling it over the week since we decided we were going to do this, like, I was talking to you and Adriana about Butcher and Blackbird, right? Like, these kinds of, like, it does edge up on dark because, like, then there is, like, it moves into that sort of, like, killer shit that we're seeing in dark, which is, I don't really want to get into, but, like, what are we drawn to as a society right now that these heroes don't actually have to act with nobility?
No, I think it's white supremacy. Part of me does think that, like, there's no bad guys. It's not like they're acting against the cops or often the other bad guys are just like you said,
other mafia.
Well, and often it's an ethnicity.
Yeah, it's like the Russian mob or the Irish
right?
mob.
Like, it's like there was this, like, really, after, like, the Tim Walz, like, kind of VP pick, there was this really funny quote because, like, somebody started shit talking the fact that he was German, and somebody's like, watch out, they're opening up cans of, like, white supremacist ethno-thinking that haven't
try and figure out new racism.
Yeah, right? Like, now we're doing inter-white racism, I don't know. I think that's part of it. I think that, like, realistically, I was thinking a lot about this. Like, probably the best organized crime, like, thing I've ever consumed is The Wire.
Yeah. Oh, 1,000%.
These are not books that are The Wire. And, like, if you wrote about criminals who were Black, they would be called, like, urban fiction, or, like, right, they would be, like, tarred with a different brush.
Right.
Like, they would literally be something that people would be like, well, I'm not going to read about that. So, I really struggle in a lot of ways with, sort of, like, my attraction to these books in some way. I don't know, right? Yeah.
We're drawn to this. Yes, I think white supremacy fine, but, like, but I also think that's, like, a kind of an easy, like, it's a little bit, I'm going to call you on that just a little bit because, like, I do think that's an easy out. Like, there's lots of white supremacy in romance, and, like,
sure,
it doesn't show, it doesn't show this way. Small town romance is rife with it, but, like, we don't.
Okay, let me finish my thought then. And look, people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine.
Tell us. We want to know.
Okay.
I feel like everybody, when we do these episodes, like, it's often, like, it's that Jen and I would have this conversation and not record it, but, like, we want you to come tell us what we're getting wrong.
So one of the things I think about a lot is, like, in books that are predominantly heteronormative, what is the role of women in these books, right? And I'm gonna now talk a little bit about something that we saw when we were at Steamy LitCon, which is we saw Gail Carriger talking about the heroine's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things she said, which I had, like, never seen before, and I need to sort of, like, run this quote down or, like, get her slides or whatever, is that when Joseph Campbell sort of came up with the idea of the monomyth, which is, like, the hero's journey, one of the things that people would ask is sort of, like, I guess, like, what's the role of women? And he's like,
that great quote.
Right, your women are to come home to.
Yeah, women are the prize.
Women are the prize. And the truth is, for many of these books, right, that is the woman's job, essentially, although she thinks she does not want it, even though she's been born into it, is to become queen, right? Like, that's the job. That is what's going to happen. Her arc is to essentially become the literal handmaiden to the patriarchy, right? So that's not white supremacy necessarily, right? Like, I think they go hand in hand.
It's not white supremacy, but yeah.
And so I think, like, that's kind of what it is. And look, I feel like I've had a lot of conversations with people who, like, I think really read these books with the lens, or, like, with this question of, like, what does it mean to essentially, like, proximity to power ? Right? And I often am like, okay, I bet there are books out there doing that. But for me, often, I will admit, these are, like, stories of capitulation, right? Like, it's submission, but to, like, your role in society, not your man in the bedroom. That's often how these books read to me. And so then I'm like, well, why do I like them so much? Like, I have to really And a lot of them I don't finish, but some I do. And then I'm like, what's the like X factor when I am drawn to this? You know, like to become your arc is to become queen. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I also I feel similarly that like these books either really work for me or they really don't work for me. There is no middle way.
I'm in or out. Mafia. I downloaded 20 of them and I could tell within
a couple chapters.
Yeah.
Right. Chapter 2.
This is good for me. This was not good for me.
This is where I want to talk about plot.
Yes.
Because I think, look, I looked at the episode that we did in 2020 and we're going to link to that episode, obviously, so you can all go look at those books, but we're not going to name those. We're not going to do very much about those books, right? But when I looked at that list, many of which I still consider my favorite Mafia romances, right? Like, no surprise, Cressley Cole's like trilogy with the Mafia is like, I think, one of the best out there. And thinking about those books and also the books that I put on the list today and thinking about like Mila Finelli, right? Like people who I think are writing like straight down the middle Mafia romances that really slap.
Yeah.
Things happen in those books, right? So there is a very real sense that as much as you're saying like this is a story of capitulation, which like, yes, okay, in Mafia Madman or whatever, like when he locks her in a cage and then he like, you know, for romance reasons, it's fine. And then they
fuck in the end of, at the end of it, right?
But like the issue being like, so she's like, fine, fuck you. I'm going to seduce you from inside this cage. Right. And I think what's really fascinating about it is like, while that's going on, there is like a whole external conflict and plot.
So much plot. I love it. Yeah.
Gas in the engine for the romance. Right. And because of that, it doesn't feel so much like capitulation.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because there is an external plot that is threatening both of them. One of them, she's getting kidnapped. He has to go after her. He has to choose her over his empire, over his revenge. We see the hero, talk about handmaidens to the patriarchy. The hero who is like patriarchy distilled, having to pass patriarchy off in order to save the heroine, right? She becomes prize, but also like in order for him to win her, he has to turn his back on.
Right, he has to choose her at some point. Yeah.
Right, the world. Does he end up being head of whatever family? Yes.
Well, that's the fantasy. You can have both, right?
The point is he chose not to and then ends up with everything. So the plot in these books carries so much water for me as a reader because I have to believe that like the crime has to take back seat, right?
Yes.
For me to be able to like understand why anybody would want into this world. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Blue Box Press, publishers of Jennifer Armentrout's Born of Blood and Ash, a flesh and fire novel. This is the last one in the series, Jen.
Yes, a thrilling conclusion, everyone, is yours for the taking. So Sarah is finally free of Colas and back with those she loves, but not everything is calm. She is plagued by memories of all she has endured, but she also has a hope for the future with her other half of her heart and soul. Meanwhile, Nikos desires, loves, and accepts every part of her, even these monstrous parts of herself that she is still battling. So they have realms to fight for, and he has no doubt that she is queen of the gods, but she has to find that faith within herself as they try to convince the other courts to support them against Colas and make the mortal realm a better, safer place for everyone. So as Sarah begins to piece together all of the importance of her bloodlines, the prophecies, she starts to understand like just how big this final battle will really be. So everybody's wondering, what do the fates have in store? But what Sarah does know is that there are very few they can trust, including maybe her. So we've got a big battle between the gods brewing, heartbreaking losses are imminent, and the true primal of death is strengthening. You know what else, though, everybody? A great romance is yours for the reading.
Well, if you would like to read Born of Blood and Ash, you can do that in print, ebook, or audiobook. And in special podcasting apps, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. This one is going to be exactly what Jennifer Armentrout fans want. It is 700 pages of absolute deliciousness. And we want to thank Blue Box Press and Jennifer Armentrout for sponsoring this week's episode.
There's also a part of me that's like, listen, when men watch The Godfather, they're not like, oh, interrogating their, right? Like, that's clearly silly, right?
Of course they're not.
But I will say this. The other thing I think is like, we are a very violent culture, right? Like,
Yes.
the kinds of things that we find entertaining, right? Like the kinds of movies we make and the kinds of, right? Like,
Yeah.
so part of me is like, it's totally also fine for us to write romances in a world that has that kind of like pure American entertainment value, right? Where like violence doesn't matter, you know?
Yes, but I still want them to feel
Feelings. Yeah, of course.
I mean, I think that's the problem, right? Like The Godfather doesn't have to show me feelings.
No, that's not the work of The Godfather.
It's not made for me, right? Like, it's like The Godfather is a language that is not, I am not native in the language of The Godfather, but I speak it fluently because I'm a woman in the world. Right?
So I think it's saying,
I am native in the language of romance novels, and I need them to speak feeling to me. And that is a very difficult layer. That's why The Sopranos was so fucking great. Because Tony Soprano went to a therapist and we saw him open up his brain. And we saw him like struggle.
Yeah. Well, and so there is like part of me, I think at like the end of the day, like I'm like America's too violent and yet I love action movies. Like we're complicated people. Like you know what I mean? Like some of it's just
right. It's safe danger, right? It's Jennifer Lynn Barnes's like universal id.
But I also think like all those things can be true at once, right? Yeah. All those things can be true at once. And I think one of the things that like I think we're all circling around a lot is, you know, like not all romance is feminist, right? And maybe it doesn't have to be, right? And so and like that's fine. And I think like one of the things that about like books like this though is I will say they are an occasional treat in my romance reading diet because if I read too many of them in a row, I just find them very depressing. Right? Like I just want women in romance to be more self-actualized and not like self-actualized to like, it would be great if I was the queen of the mafia. You know what I mean? Like I fought my whole life because I didn't want to be in the mafia. I wasn't going to live like that just because my family, and then I am anyway. Like too many of those stories depress me. But every once in a while, I'm like, fucking plot, take me away. Thank God something's happening. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I'm holding a lot of those truths at like the same time. Right. These are books I really enjoy. Every once in a while, there's a sweet spot for me where some of them work and some of them do not at all. And I don't keep reading enough to figure out like what that is. Even within a series, I'll have some of the books work and some of them not work. Right. So it's like there's like, I think what it is though, back to like the medieval, that 80s reading that we did when we were growing up is I think the ones that work are like modeling a certain kind of relationship. Right. And it just like hits whatever like was built in like the romance reader system that I loved. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I mean, sometimes I find it like silly, you know what I mean? And by that, I mean like, oh, like they're in the mafia, but they're definitely not going to sell heroin. Like, come the fuck on. Like, some of that's silly to me. Like, and I'm actually fascinated as a reader by the ways in which like romance authors approaching this draw those lines about what is acceptable crime and what isn't. That to me is honestly probably one of the most fascinating things about
This
these
is a
books.
dissertation.
Oh, yeah.
I would be very fascinated.
Please write
to
this
read.
and send it to us. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, because it is. And I mean, like, listen, I write historicals. We've been eliding terrible crime since the beginning of the genre.
Right.
But what's really fascinating is in this way we elide terrible crime while also seeing them do other crime.
Right.
Like some terrible crime is okay, but other terrible crime is not.
Yeah.
And I think, but I will say this, like, to your point about, like, you know, the world.
Yeah.
Just like being different now. Like, we see across all forms of media, like, really terrible people doing terrible things who are heroes. Like, presented to us as heroes.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think that's a really fascinating shift. There's a lot of discussion of this in, like, text about like analysis of media of film and television, that, like, we are in the age of the anti-hero. And I think that's really interesting. And I think it's interesting because I think we've all kind of come to, like, if you really want to, like, play it out, it's like we've all come to a place where, like, everybody is bad. Like, capitalism is bad, politicians are bad, like, everybody's bad. So what is the best kind of bad?
Yeah, like, and how do I live with myself? I mean, you know.
So if he's just, like, shooting bad guys.
Sure.
Okay.
If he's a serial killer who only kills other bad people. Sure. You know, here's actually the thing. So that to me is interesting, but not like interesting in like an academic sense. Here's
like a theoretical
sense, because I'm fascinated by it, but I think it's like silly when I think about it. Here's like the idea that, like, you know, they'll do prostitution but not trafficking or whatever. Like the way, like those lines. Sometimes I'm just like, come on. One of the things, and I'm sure I don't think I've ever said it on the podcast before, but maybe I have, is at some point I was talking to our friend Joe, who writes dark romance, Joe Brenner. And I was saying the thing that I think is really interesting about, like, dark romance or mafia. I think of mafia romance as honestly not being dark romance. I think they're doing different things. Or at least if it's a continuum.
Yeah, I'm not sure readers necessarily would always say that, but yes, I agree with you. I think what we're going to probably discuss here is not dark. I don't have a single dark romance on my list.
Neither. Or that, like, true dark romance readers would find them satisfying as dark romances, right? I think they'd be like, it's not dark enough. But here's the one thing I did say to Joe at one point, and it really, like, did kind of resonate with me as being, like, potentially interesting. I said, the thing about being a woman in the world, I think, for certainly in America, is, you know, there's a constant sense of evaluation, right? Like, am I safe?
Yep.
Is this man approaching me on the sidewalk, or that in my workplace, or, right? Are they safe? And it's a constant, like, we are constantly thinking that. And the thing that's interesting to me about mafia romance or dark romance is that this is a world where men do not pretend to be safe. Right? They are like, in your face, I am bad. I am a killer. I am a stalker. I am, you know what I mean? I am part of organized crime. I do these bad things. And I do think, what would it be like to live in a world where men weren't hiding? Right? Those men were not hiding, right? And women could just operate knowing exactly what they were dealing with every time. And that to me is sort of, then, you know, so even though I can be kind of cavalier about sometimes feeling like
every man is dangerous,
every
but
man
which
is
ones
dangerous.
are safe danger for us?
Right. Or just like, how would I operate in the world if every man I could really
overt about their danger,
and I didn't have to, because, you know, the other danger for women is if I'm offended, if I walk across the street when I don't feel safe. You know, I mean, a lot of women will, like, walk right into danger because fear of offending someone is also then right? Like, you're really stuck. And so I think that is something interesting to me about these books is, let's put you in a world where men don't pretend to be safe. Right. And now see what happens.
Now, and I also think that there's it's not the same, but it lives in the same end of the pool, right? Which is the appeal of this kind of like dangerous alpha, like, like powerful, stern, like unyielding hero, right? Who is the hero of the old school romance?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I think what's fascinating about it is the rise of this hero in indie runs exactly counter to the demise of this hero in traditional
that's
publishing.
fascinating to me too.
And the success of this hero, and it is not to be diminished, the level of success these books have. Like,
absolutely.
And they are read far and wide. And, I agree. Like, I really love these heroes in a lot of, like, they scratch a very big itch for me they pushed the button that was installed for me 30 years ago. Right. So, but what's really fascinating to me is how traditional publishing seems to have like turned its back on this particular kind of hero in any form, right? Like if you think about him on a spectrum of like, 1 to 10, like there is like a classic kind of historical hero, like in 2024 is like a 3 or 4 on this spectrum. And these guys are like a 5 or 6. And then there's like serial killers like up on the other end, right? So, but traditional's like, we don't want any of it.
We don't want any of it.
Everybody is like a man who reads romance novels and like would never dream is like post patriarchy, right? Like these heroes are the heroes in largely that we're seeing rise up in traditional romance are heroes who like I think are fantasy for us. Like the idea of but like fantasy in real life, which is like crazy to me in the sense that like these are the heroes who we like wish we could go on a date with and like marry and have build families with. Like these are just like
good guys,
men who've never dreamed once in their life about like, pushing you up against a wall.
Right.
But like these guys, like, so what's really fascinating here is what I wish I could see is the Venn diagram.
Yeah. The bifurcation. Yeah.
Like where are the readers? Are there like and my speculation truly, Jen, is there are more readers who read both than there are who read separately.
Who read only one or the other. Yeah.
Because I think there is something really fascinating about the fact that these heroes have been like pushed out of traditional and so well embraced.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Although what we're seeing now is like these books make it big enough and then traditional's happy to
they get brought back in.
Right.
I mean, you think about like
first,
Sarah J. Maas, right? Like, I mean, like,
right.
Yes, obviously there are exceptions to the rule. But
yeah,
not many.
Well, I think we're going to see more of them. I mean, I think more. I mean, by that I mean
I don't really count the ones that are brought back into traditional, like because it feels like those were born and made popular.
Right. Well, but that's indie. I think that's actually my point. I think that what traditional publishing is doing is saying like we're not taking any risks anymore. We're going to let everybody else take those risks, and then like when things rise to the top, we are happy to then kind of sweep in. Right.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, it feels like that's happening on both ends of the spectrum. Like that's happening with these, the small town, like,
sure.
Post-patriarchy heroes too.
Yeah.
It's really wild.
It is. It is.
In traditional publishing. So
regardless of all that, like you, the thing that keeps me invested in these books is plot. Like things happen.
Yeah.
Things happen.
So we are now 50 minutes into this episode and we have not recommended one single book. So would you please recommend a plot-driven mafia romance with a sexy hero to our listeners?
This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by Sophie H. Morgan, author of Bewitched, the second book in the Toil and Trouble series.
Okay, so this is so cute. In the world of this series, witches and warlocks exist and magic exists, but humans have no idea. And witches and warlocks kind of like live amongst the humans. So Leah Turner, our human heroine, finds out about the witch high society masked ball. And she does what any self-respecting human woman would do and sneaks herself right in there to figure out what's going on. Well, while she's there, Jen, of course, she meets this like hot warlock who is masked, and she's into him. They dance, and she has to kind of like get the hell out of there before anybody figures out that she's a human.
Real Cinderella vibes, I'm sensing, Sarah.
Exactly. So Gabriel Goodnight, our hero,
perfect name.
He has like a whole thing. He's very responsible. He's extremely powerful. He's real good at magic. And he wants to inherit his family business. But in order to do that, he needs the like board of the warlocks to approve of him. And he has to complete a final test, which is live among humans for 3 months without any magical powers. So he turns up, would you believe, Jen, until he walks directly into Leah's bar. She immediately clocks him, but it's obvious that he has no idea who she is. He has no idea that she knows that magic exists. And these two are starting quickly to fall for each other. What's going to happen when he finds out that she's been keeping secrets from him? And what's going to happen when he has to go back to the witch world and she can't come with him?
Well, we're going to find out when we read Bewitched. If you love a witchy rom-com with a fish out of water hero and big time sunshine and grumpy vibes, this is the book for you. It is available right now for pre-order. It comes out on August 20th, and it is available in print, ebook, and audio. So if your podcast app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to get that book. Thank you to Sophie H. Morgan for sponsoring this week's episode. The one I'm reading that has like kind of the classic Mafia setup is called Deviant Hearts by Jagger Cole. This is a book with a marriage is going to be what starts it, right? And
so are we doing this in themes? Because I have marriage.
Sure.
There are lots of marriage ones.
So many.
Let's talk about marriage.
And this is like a really good one because his name is Ares, and he is part of the Greek Mafia, sure. And actually, it's fucking great. Everybody in his family is named after a Greek god. He's got a brother named Hades and all that.
Yeah, of course they are.
And she is part of the Irish Mafia. And her name is Neve. I think I'm saying it right. Neve. Anyway, she is it's really interesting. She starts off as being like 20, she's like 24, 25, and she's like a graduate student at NYU, and she's kind of talked her uncle Killian into letting her kind of move out of the family compound and like have her own apartment. And yet she's sort of picked up by her sister and the bodyguard, like they have a bodyguard, and kind of taken to like, a meeting, and she doesn't really know what it's about, but she's can't, dress in her fancy pajamas, like go put on some real clothes. And when she gets there, she's essentially told
she's wearing wedding pajamas.
Now, luckily, she does not get married right away, but she's told you are going to be marrying Ares. Like essentially, our families are going to be essentially like if we do not combine, both of us will be wiped out. Like this is our only chance, right? And she is totally pissed about it, right? She's like, I don't want this at all. But of course, what happens is, what's great about this is it's like, again, this is like your classic setup, but it is really well executed, right? He doesn't believe that she's going to have what it takes to be his queen. And yet, like, there's a lot of like dissension in the ranks about kind of like, this marriage. And he sees her like essentially like there's like an uncle who's very against it. And she kind of like talks him down and is basically like, this isn't your business. This is what's going to happen. And he's like, oh, wait, she will be my queen. And so it's setting up a whole series, but it's like, what it is it's really well written. She is someone who, what I like about her is because she's a little older, she isn't like a young ingenue who has been completely sheltered, right? Like she has tried to like make her way out of this world, a little bit, right? But because of her growing up in this world, she really has she can't figure out how to do it, right? Like, so instead of it showing her sort of like I don't know, like you have no choice but to get married into this and immediately have babies. She seems far more, I don't know, like primed to kind of like, I wanted something different for my life, but I understand this world and kind of my place in it. And so I know also how to be successful in the real world, whereas in the mafia world, where in the real world, I can't. Like, I don't quite know how to be a success there. Right. And of course, he's gorgeous and, beautiful and super crazy rich and, whatever. They live on a mansion on top of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, as one does.
Sure they do.
Sure.
Yeah, of course.
Sure. It's great. Deviant Hearts by Jagger Cole. And from what I can tell, Jagger Cole has written a ton of books, so you just can dive right in.
Well done. So before we did not do any Mila Finale books in our last episode. So I feel very happy saying like, all right, we've talked about Mila Finale before on the podcast. If you have not dived into these books, you absolutely should. The whole series is really, really fun. Several of them are marriage ones, and I want to talk about the one that really Giacomo.
Now is the time for Giacomo, Sarah.
Listen, you all. This book is the book where like I read this and like in the first chapter or two, I don't know if it's the first chapter or two, but it's where the book begins in my mind, Jen. And so, I mean, it's so medieval. It's such like a perfect medieval romance. Okay, so Giacomo is like, finally in charge of like his little fiefdom of the mafia, right? Like he's got his clan. It's in Sicily. He's running the show. And this series is connected, like most of Joanna's books, via sisters or women. And Emma, the heroine, is like the good one who wants out, which is a classic trope, right? Like she does not want anything to do with this shit. No. Like she's going to be a doctor. She's grown up with it. She has a plan. She's going to be a doctor. She's going to go to medical school. She's going to be great. Except because of mafia romance reasons, some old dude is like, her dad is sick and he like clocks that her father is losing control of like his little fiefdom. And so this sort of like superior kind of king mafioso who is old says, you need to marry Giacomo. And like, you don't get a choice. Neither of you get a choice. Like this is a political wedding. So Emma, the, virgin from England, is sent to Giacomo, the laird in Scotland.
I mean, you're not wrong.
I mean, I'm not wrong.
And he doesn't want anything to do with it.
And he wants nothing to do with it. And then
you know how the English are, bossing the Scottish around.
This fucking king is like, now you've married in front of me. I made sure it happened. Now go fuck.
Yeah, bring out the bed sheets with the stains.
And then he literally is like, bring out the bed sheets.
Yeah,
with
it's crazy.
It's mental.
And hot. I don't know. It's fine.
Was I freaking eating it up? I absolutely was. I loved every page of this fucking book. There's like a whole breeder bit here. Like if you're into breeding, this is your book, everyone. But but what's great about this scene, and then I will stop talking about this book, but like what's great about this scene is she's like, fuck, like I don't want my first time to be like in this bed
with this old man out
like,
there
with these like old mafia dudes outside waiting, like listening, like gross. And so he's like, no worries, I got you. He punches a fucking wall until his knuckles bleed and then bloodies the sheets with his bleeding hand. And I was fucking gone. Just go. I mean,
you were like, gone, baby, gone. Yeah.
That was it. Like, it was like,
you were locked
perfect. Like, it was the McLean. It was like my dream.
Listen,
scene.
Joanna's Mafia series, right? The Kings of Italy is legitimately like, it pushes all those same buttons. Like, she read all the same books we did. Yeah.
Is so fucking good. And listen, like it is like she opened my brain, pulled out what I want in a hero and wrote it down. And so, this is like a pure Sarah's Id book, but like, you're welcome, everyone. It's so fucking great. And I'm not going to tell you the rest of it, but there is the resolution. At one point, I was like, how am I supposed to be a doctor while you're out here killing people? Like, what kind of Hippocratic oath is that? And it's pretty great the way it's all sort of sorted out, as though it's like, don't worry about it. And don't worry about it, everyone.
Yeah, listen, we're just having a nice time. I'm going to just name check another like sort of wedding. Cora Riley's Bound in Blood series is actually terrific. And again, I kind of read a bunch in a row and then like kind of tapped out because there was too many. But like the first one has that sort of classic, like you have to get married. And he is this like terrifying monster, Luca, right? And of course, he's super in love with her. So that's a great series if you're kind of like, again, a real classic Mafia series. And it's really good. I want to talk about a book called Scorned Vows by Victoria Page, which has, again, that same setup. Natalia and Luca, where, they get married. Like literally, I think the book opens with their marriage. And
perfect.
He is, he's like, I'm going to take you to Paris on our honeymoon. I'm going to get you pregnant right away. Like I have a job to do and, you do too.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as she gets pregnant, he like really pulls away. And she kind of realizes like, oh, he was just kind of playing me. And he's like it's dual point of view. In his chapters is like very clear with his men. Like, yeah, like that's what I have to do. You just like seduce them and make them fall in love with you. And then then you can leave them essentially. The kicker in this one though, is that she has a side gig as a hacker. And he has no idea about it.
Terrific.
And so he like puts her away in like the family estate, and she's just like pregnant while he's in Chicago criming, right? And she is so
even dick,
right? And she's so pissed at him that she like basically falls back into her hacking lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And this causes kind of, okay, everybody, if you're interested in this book, just like pause now and like fast forward or whatever, like a minute, because I'm gonna kind of spoil it a little bit. I like for the first like 35%. So anyway, you're kind of like, this is all happening really fast, like this, the hacking and all this business. And then bad guys come and like have traced her, and like he thinks she's dead. And she's given birth, right? He thinks she's dead and he's just there with the baby. And then the book picks up at maybe 35%, 2 years later. This bitch has amnesia and doesn't remember her entire life in the Mafia.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, this is a really smart, like, I don't know. It just felt like it takes that classic beginning and gave us a heroine who was interesting and doing something different, and then just like completely blows the whole fucking thing up. And so, she's like
amazing
at work, and some guy from Chicago like sees her, and she doesn't recognize him. She doesn't know who it is. And I was like, okay, now we're in it. So that's Scorned Vows by Victoria Page.
All right, I have one, Jen, that you're going to love the setup on.
Okay.
You're going to love it. Okay. So I want to talk about Because You're Mine by Claire Contreras. Okay. So the setup here is Catalina, our heroine, is a ballet dancer. And she is like the good sister who like got out, again, a like kind of like virgin sister who like got out of the game, didn't want to be part of the Mafia, like left Chicago to get away from that whole world and like moved away, and she just dances all the time. And she's like a good sister. And when her sister calls her and is like, we have a situation and I need a favor, she's like, am I gonna have to like get into a Mafia wedding? And the sister's like, no. It's nothing like that. It's nothing like that. What I need you to do is go to this college lecture and like pose as just like a casual observer. and figure out what's going on, because this lecture is about like the history of the mafia.
Okay.
And we think that this guy, we're not sure what his deal is. Like, we think he might be FBI. We just need somebody who nobody recognizes to basically be in the room.
Okay.
Cut to Lorenzo.
Yes, Lorenzo.
Who is like kind of a lawyer.
He lives in a real nice house in Providence.
Yeah, exactly. Who he himself has also been asked to do a favor and like basically like pretend to be a college lecturer to give this lecture on the history of the mafia. And so, of course, I sit up and take notice because this is actually professor student, but just like,
Sure.
you know, the power dynamics are elided. And like, basically she goes to class and like, he is like, oh shit, she's really hot. And so he starts like keeping her after, like, he's like, you know, see me after class. And like, and then they have this like very hot, you know, whatever. And Kat is worried that he's going to find out that she's like deeply connected to the mafia, which he is lecturing out about. But also she's like, is he in the FBI? But and then he is also like worried she's going to figure out that like he's not a lecturer. He's actually a guy who like knows this shit because he's lived it. It is really fun. You would love it, Jen, because she's a ballerina. And so like, and the sex is off the chain. Like, and so, I mean, like they use a lot of like, listen, she's very put together.
She's very flexible, I bet. Very bendy.
She has a lot of muscles. So anyway, I think this is a good example of like a mafia romance that for me just like really made sense. Like it could have easily just been like a straight up romance. But it has like mafia sprinkled along the top.
Okay, like my next group of books, I guess, are like, it's not called the Mafia, but it's basically like organized crime of, you know, like, but it's got like a cute little name. I don't know how else to say it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in a series I really like, everybody's heard me talk about this Amelia Shea's series called Ghost Town East, which is like a motorcycle club series. But in this book, in that series, they're like sort of mafia counterparts, like their organized crime counterparts were called the Underground. And it's these three men, Trey, Rogue, and Oz, that run this. And it turns out that, so now she's on writing that series, and she just released book number 2 called Going Rogue. The first one was about Trey. And in these books, then you sort of realize how these three became essentially like this organized crime force, like, right? And it turns out that they were raised by a man named Sal, who was in the mafia. And he like essentially like took them in and from foster care, or somehow like kind of came across them and realized that, you know, they were like, you know, kind of in the life already. And he like taught them and then like kind of brought them up to be like a triumvirate. And I really am interested in that too, because it's like it's not like the mafia, like they're making their own mafia essentially, right? And so in this one, in Going Rogue, Rogue is like the like wild man, right? Like he's just like the one with the temper and the one who nobody wants to cross because he just will lose his fucking mind and shoot you or something. And what happens is the heroine's name is Quinn. And the book starts off with she's like a low-level runner, right? So she's on like a run with her boyfriend and this other guy. And money goes missing. And it's money from the underground. And so Trey and Rogue show up. And he, of course, is like, why am I so wildly attracted to this girl? Right? And it turns out that like her boyfriend essentially set her up. And so then they go and she, though, is so terrified that she like runs and she manages to get away from them. And this, of course, just like triggers Rogue's urge to like find her, right? Like no one runs from me, you know, no one gets away from the underground, right?
They're like dogs.
Of course.
Like if you run, they're going to chase.
And then it's like really interesting because they go to her apartment, like they're trying to track her down. And, you know, they find like $2,000 in a drawer, but they find like $60,000 under like a floorboard. And they're like, wait, what is going on with this woman? But as they bring her back in and they find her, she is also a hacker. And it turns out that like she wasn't even.
How funny.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like and I think in some ways, like when I was thinking about the two hackers in like one weekend of reading, I was like, it's a really interesting because this would be a truly terrifying, like someone who could break into their systems, right? Someone who could find out their secrets would be like a really big threat. And I think it's like a smart play. Like who could be a big threat to someone who is, like essentially in this elevated position. So I really like this series. You could read this series on its own, and it's 2 of the 3 books have been written. So, but I do think there are like references to other characters or whatever. And so that was Going Rogue.
I would like to talk about, I said I was going to talk about some historicals.
Oh, yeah.
Some like classic clan historicals. And I'm not going to talk about that many of them, but I do want to name check Maya Banks for Never Seduce a Scot, which is it's again a rival clans. The king has ordered them the hero to marry her. He is the laird of his clan. She is like the daughter she is deaf, and nobody knows that she is deaf, but she has taught herself to read lips, and she just like lets everybody believe that like she is touched, like she doesn't speak. And so her clan kind of like shunts her out to him as like, sure, we'll marry because the king says we have to, but like you just take this one. And he is instantly, this will give you the like heavy duty protector vibe that you get from Mafia romance. This kind of sense of like, she is now mine. I claim her. She is my possession now. And if anybody comes near her, I'll fuck them up. And like, this is when I think about a Scottish historical that really does the Mafia, like that sort of true Mafia hero vibe, it's this one. So that's Maya Banks's Never Seduce a Scot.
I have a really fun one, which is, it is essentially like a vampire Mafia romance.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, no kidding, right? And
we didn't talk about that either, that there are like, this is all over paranormal.
Right. And this is a new book. So it's called Her Dark Salvation by Caitlin Brem. And listen, this is a great read. And it's one of the few romances I've read recently that really, I think, understands like tone and mood. I know that's like a big statement, but let me explain what I mean. So the book starts off with Anna. She is a professor of like finance at MIT. I don't know, numbers. And she's and she's 45. And so she's tenured and she has had a lot of success in her life as an academic. But she is like hyper aware of this sense of like time passing her by, right? Like she has friends that have married and have kids, and right, like there's something about like her life that is just not pleasing to her. She has all the markers of success, but doesn't feel that she's like kind of happy. So she arranges to take a sabbatical, and kind of conveniently at the same time, her best friend who owns some sort of like consulting group says, actually, this is perfect timing because I have a job for you that like your particular skill set is like I need someone with your skill set because, to like work with one of my clients. Like it's like a really detailed kind of analytical job that your math will math with. So she goes to meet Marco, who is, actually, he's not a vampire. He's a blood demon. And we know that it's 2024 in the book, but the prologue is in 1965. And he is sort of in the prologue, has arranged to essentially like leave the Mafia behind and like sort of be his own man in Boston. And so like now we're seeing him like, 60 years later, right? And he has this like really big, sort of multinational company, but he thinks that someone is stealing from him, but he can't figure out who. And so he needs someone with like her analysis to essentially like run like these big regression models to figure out like what's happening. And he can't trust anybody because somebody is potentially, and the thing that I love about this book is, so there's all of this like sexual tension between them, but there's also this sense of Anna like kind of thinking like, okay, I guess this is just like a cool job I have and my friend set me up with it. And then like one day a local mafia, like the mafia guy comes in and she's like, wait, what's happening? And then Mark goes like, you have to come with me down to City Hall. And they essentially like, like threaten somebody. And it's like this, her descent into his world is the tone of it. It like feels almost like cinematic. Right? Like, because you're watching her kind of realize like something must be wrong, but she is so drawn to him. And yet she doesn't really have like the real world experience to kind of figure out like, is this man interested in me? Like and so it's really interesting because she is like a older heroine, which people are always looking for, but she's so consumed with like the idea that her life is passing her by. And then we see that in many ways her life has passed her by, right? Academia has really like put her in a kind of bubble wrap. So it's very, I don't know, it's like sexy in a way, like very noir almost, right? Like the way that it feels as you're reading it. It really captures sort of a mood as she is like slowly trying to figure out what's going on. And of course, she has no idea. Like, she's figured out his mafia connections, but like, how is she going to figure out that he is this like a blood demon, right? And his whole family is. And so this is how it's different than vampires is like he has a family, and what happens is like they're in England, his parents are in Italy, and he and his brother and sister are in Boston, and like every couple of decades they switch so that they can essentially,
of course, they can fake
being like new again and to new people.
How funny.
And so it's like really like, I don't know, it just really like,
that's a clever piece of world building.
Yes. And it really like scratched a lot of my itches. So it's like the mafia stuff is on the surface. She can see it, but she cannot see the fact that he is a literal demon. And it's awesome. It's really good.
That's really
so
fun.
That's Her Dark Salvation by Caitlin Brim.
So I feel like you can't talk about Mafia in 2024 without talking about one of these Mafia schools.
Agree.
Okay, so I want to talk about P. Rain's The Mafia Academy.
Yep.
And so P. Rain is the pen name of Piper Rain, who writes small town romances that are like very tropey and yummy as small town authors, but they write a series called The Mafia Academy. I'm sorry. I can't
delighted by
it. Series without laughing because it's like such a delight. Yeah. So basically there's a school, Sikuro Academy. And it is like a private
college.
Private school. It's a private college for mafia kids.
Sure.
It's where the mafia sends their kids.
Well, you can't send her to regular college, Sarah.
You can, though.
Where else are they going to learn to kill each other?
You can't send them to regular college and then write a series of romance novels about it. So Mirabella, she is the daughter of, her father is a mafioso, and he has arranged a marriage. I mean, it's really classic. He has arranged a marriage for her to marry the next in line to like this other crime family. Again, like a political marriage. And she is like, no way, I'm not doing that. I don't want to be like just a wife. I have plans. I'll get engaged to him, but like, no way are we ever marrying. And things work out great because she learns pretty quickly that he and his father have like, been killed in a car bombing.
Great for her.
And so she's like, terrific, very sad for them. But like, this actually worked out pretty well for me. I'm going to go to this college and like, graduate and like get a life of my own. So she heads off to college and then boom, one day he shows up.
Yeah.
the son shows up totally fine, handsome as all fuck. Like that car bomb did not harm him. I mean, it did a little bit, obviously, and very much mentally. So he's back because he's done all this research on like who tried to kill him and who did kill his father. And like he's out for revenge, my favorite.
Of course.
And he turns up because he has realized that like the baddie is somehow connected to this private college. And when he gets there, he's like, oh, great, I can kill two birds with one stone. I can simultaneously figure out who tried to kill me and did kill my father, and also woo the hell out of my future potential wife.
Right.
So it is pretty great because she's like, I won't do it. And he's like, but no, yes, you will.
But yes, you will.
And so that is Vow of Revenge. And then once you're done with that, there are 3 more books in that series.
Just as a heads up, like full disclosure, I did work on one of those books with them, and like kind of more like setting up the world, and like kind of read the first book with them. So it is really fun.
I have not read all of these books, but the 4th one is called Craving My Rival. First of all, perfect.
A+.
No notes on that title. And that is a Russian versus Italian.
Yeah, I mean, right? Listen, that's hardcore. Yeah, they're really fun. The really thing that's interesting me is about like basically like Mafia Junior, like these books where they're like all 20 or whatever. So the one we have talked like what
I do before you start. Can I just say though, like you guys, there are a lot of bad books out there too in this mess. We have done some culling because I did read one where I was like, this is terrible. I
read one.
It was Mafia Junior, and I was like,
can't do it.
I cannot.
Yeah. No, I mean, because again, like that's where you're like, this all just really defies logic and reason. But I did read one that defied logic and reason in a way that I liked. Although it is also...
So I just want to say, everyone, we have actually like tested. These are tested.
Yes, we test drove these. I read one. I was like, oh, this is bonkers. I'm going to start it. And then immediately was like, I'll tell you about it later. Okay. I read a book called Seventh Circle.
By Jen, we really deserve a lot of credit for not doing any of that on this podcast.
I know.
Like, we're so good.
We're so professional, everybody. I totally,
We do save that for the chat later.
Okay, so there's a book called Seventh Circle by Tate James. This is the first book in the Hades series. Heads up, everybody. They're all cliffhangers. I only read the first one because I'm a creature of habit. But here's the reason, the thing that like lured me in is that she is the mafioso here. And I was like, okay, now I'm interested. She's also 23. Fine. She basically is like was trained by her father to like be an assassin, and he sent her off to like assassin camp or whatever. And so apparently some of these characters were part of a previous series, but I just picked up with this one. It's everyone calls her Hades. And she essentially runs like a legal kind of corporation, and then on the side runs, her mafia business. And it's great. Everyone calls her Sir. And she kills a lot of people. And you know what?
I love it.
I was honestly very into it.
I love it.
This is also a why choose romance. So she has several different suitors. And in the first book, her like major suitor is this guy named Lucas. He is actually a little younger than her. He's 21. It turns out he's a little younger than that, which is part of the thing. But then another suitor is going to be her best friend, Zed. And then Cass, who is sort of like a lieutenant from like a rival motorcycle club or something. And then she was engaged when she was like a teenager, and she killed that guy. Only turns out he's not dead. So I think in this book, she's pretty much like only kind of cementing the relationship with Lucas. But apparently in the other book, she like it's why choose. Like she is not forced to choose any of them. Like she can essentially be with all of them. And so these are the books. But what I really liked about this book was like kind of reading one where the woman was in charge and she was kind of the badass. And everyone's terrified of her. And I just a lot of things happen. There's quite a bit of plot, but most of that plot was that she was in charge.
Terrific.
A+, everybody. No notes.
Terrific.
So Seventh Circle was the one I read. Good luck to everybody reading all 4. That's not really my ministry, but I'm sure it's a nice time.
I will just say, if you are interested in She's in Charge, there is a Mafia romance that I have enjoyed that is, I think, edges up into dark in a way that, like, I was not going to reference it today, but I will just reference it because you made me think of it. And that is JJ McAvoy's Ruthless People. Okay. She is very, very powerful and sort of unhinged. So, like, take that as you will if you're interested in going in that direction.
Okay, I have one more, I guess I want to talk about. It's a series, and I'm going to recommend 2 of the books in this series. They are by S.J. Tilley, and they are part of the Alliance series. So just like the Underground was the Underground, this is the Alliance, right? I'm making my own little, they're making their own little, their own little mafia. This time in Minnesota, where Tim Walz lives. We love you, Tim. Okay.
Tim Walz would never allow this, by the way.
No, goodness.
He would absolutely not. He'd invite everyone over for a hot dish.
But them.
No. And them. And then, like, coach them into like
being better,
being people. Decent people, and maybe they'd like to teach
maybe
children instead.
Sure. Okay. Anyway, I would like to recommend the first and the last book in this series, and that's Nero is the first one, and Hans is the last one. And Nero has it's
a real like twisty turny name situation. Roman emperor and then a German guy.
Yes. Just Sarah.
I know. No, I'm not criticizing. I'm just like I'm color commentating.
That's your job. Nero has a great opening, right? So there's a young woman. It's like a nice night. She's up on the second floor of her apartment building. It's not a super nice apartment building, but she's on the second floor, so she feels safe having her patio door open. And she's watching TV, and all of a sudden, a man appears on her patio.
Batman.
Nero. Fine. And basically, like, she should be terrified, and she is, but it's clear that he is essentially just like hiding out. Like, she hears cop cars going by and he's on the run, and so she just like he's like, don't worry, just like stay cool and it'll be fine, right? And but he can't stop thinking about her. And
of course,
right?
And she leaves her door open.
Yeah, well, a couple nights later, she leaves her door open again.
She's hot. She needs a breeze.
She needs Nero to come back. And he understands the second time that it's like an invitation, right?
Of course it is.
And the thing that is, I think, really her name's Peyton. I think the thing that's really brilliant about this book, the reason it really ended up working for me, is because I found she essentially came from a broken home and had to run away from home. And there's a way that like being with Nero, I think, allows her to really like feel safe in the world, like truly. Because his proximity to danger like kind of allows her to like really, like, she made so many steps on her own but then got frozen, and like something about being with him like frees her. And so it's like a really interesting, they're a truly interesting pairing in that way. Mm-hmm. Okay, the last book in the series is called Hans, and I actually read it first, and I would recommend that to anybody. He's sort of, the Alliance is these 3 guys, Dom and King and Nero, and then Hans they think is like kind of working against them, and then they like figure out that he's actually not. And in Hans, he is like an assassin for hire, and he lives in like, some cul-de-sac, and a house comes up for sale when he's gone on like a business trip, and it gets sold, and he was like, God damn it, I would have bought it and like, made my little cul-de-sac of, Hansness or whatever.
Right.
And instead, this beautiful girl named Cassie has moved in, and she's like, brings him plates of food and like, like cookies. Like, she's desperate to make friends with her one neighbor. And let me tell you, I have brought you food, but I'm a terrible cook. has never been used to better effect
That
in a
is
romance novel ever.
Possibly my favorite microtrope. Like, does he say to all of his people, like, you'll fucking eat it and love it?
No, listen, he eats it. He eats it all, even though it's so gross. I mean, it is. And then she like leaves him like
Perfect.
I mean, it's really
it's all I want.
Yes,
you know
it's
why?
great.
Because that is like the perfect way to show a man just brought low.
Yes. Listen, it is.
Especially when they're like wealthy or powerful and can have whatever they want.
Yeah.
And instead they're eating your like disgusting
crazy
hot dish.
fucking brownies, right? Yeah, it is great. It's
absolutely
it's probably like, you know, everybody's kind of like, oh, I'm having such a hard time reading. Like, I started Hans and was like, don't talk to me until I am done. And it was a great feeling. I am really fascinated. The other two books in the series, I've been flirting everybody with the idea. I've like no free time. One of the books in this series, I've been flirting with for a long time of like starting like a Substack essentially called Jen Edits Romance, where every once in a while I just talk about like, here's a book that made an interesting choice. It works or doesn't, but like, and this is not a book I worked on, right? This is just a book like when I read it, there was one of them that I was like, this is an interesting choice was made. And I keep thinking that if I were to actually do it, the first one I would write about would be this book, Dom, because it does something interesting. And I was really fascinated by it, like sort of like as an editor, kind of like how this choice get made. And so I haven't done it yet, but maybe me announcing it will actually make it happen.
Wait, so you're not going to tell us though what the interesting thing is?
No, I'm saving it for my Substack, Sarah.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Everything's a hustle.
You know what it is? I think part of the reason why is I don't think it's like a choice that really works. And I think it's easier.
Well, then, so we don't do that here, but will you tell me later?
Yes, I will tell you later.
All right.
But Hans is a fucking banger, and he eats those crazy charred corn cookies, Sarah.
I hope that's not all he eats, because the other thing that I want to talk about, just briefly, you know, an hour and a half in, is the fact that cunnilingus is like woefully missing from a lot of these books. Not the ones that we recommend.
Oh, no, listen, all these guys are super into it.
Listen, if your heroes don't go down, what are you doing reading that book?
This is the real Mafia meal.
Yeah. There's a murder meal, and then there's like a real meal. It has to get done.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But so here's my thing. I'm noticing out there, writers. I see what you're doing there, and I think it's the patriarchy, and I don't care for it. And heroes should eat. And that's what I have to say about that. Well,
listen,
I think that's a good place to end.
I do too.
I am Sarah McLean. I am here with my friend, Jen Prokop. We are Fated Mates, and you can listen to us every single Wednesday in your ear holes, wherever you listen to podcasts. Big, exciting news. On August 24th, we are launching Fated States 2024. That means you can join us and some number of other Fated Mates listeners as we phone bank to get Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and Democrats into office in November, up and down the ticket. You can find out more at fatedmates.net/fatedstates. You can click on the link there to sign up for the Zooms with Indivisible. There are links there. There are instructions there. We can't wait to see you. There will be special guests. There will be giveaways of books. There is a Boppin' Chat where people will talk about all sorts of things that are not appropriate for Tim Walz's ears. And but we are here anyway. In the meantime, please join us on Instagram at Fated Mates Pod, on Threads at Fated Mates Pod. We are on Blue Sky. We are on Tumblr. You can find us at fatedmates.net. If you click on show notes there, it'll take you directly to all the interesting things that we've talked about today, including a list of the books. What else, Jen?
That's it, everybody. We love you.
Oh, no, the Patreon.
Oh, yeah, the Patreon.
If an hour and a half of us is not enough this week, and you'd like to listen to our August Patreon episode, you can head over and join the Patreon at fatedmates.net/Patreon.
All these things.
And actually, I think we like in the mix of voting for the best romances. Did that happen?
I think it's all still ongoing. I will admit I have been a little... We were out of town, and I don't know what happened. And I broke my Wordle streak. It's just been sad. I've been mid-morning.
Oh, it was rough. Ugh. That was a rough day for everyone.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, it's still raw. Okay.
I went from 425 to 4, everybody.
It's rough, ROUGH. So,
let's wrap it up right there. I can't beat that.
You like that. Can't beat it. All right. Goodbye, everyone. We love you.